Hi, sophomore and freshmen. Today you're going to be talking about the pre-ACT science section. I am Mrs. Myers, and I'm going to be talking to you about this section of your pre-ACT. Okay, so you will be taking different tests depending on how old you are. Freshmen, you take something called the Pre-ACT Science 9, and sophomores, you take the sophomore version. The reason you're not taking the real ACT is because it's very difficult, and we want to give you kind of a fighting chance to see where you might be if you take something that's on your level. Okay. The purpose of taking this pre-ACT is that you will get a score range predictions. You could say, okay, based on this, we think you're going to get between a 24 and a 27, something like that. So you can kind of see where you're at, see like maybe what colleges might be appropriate for you in a couple years. And you can see, oh, I did really badly on the science section. I need to make sure I work on the science. Or, oh, I was so good at the math. That's one that I'm going to feel really confident about. Okay. How does this compare to the real ACT? You can see they're pretty similar. It's a little bit shorter. Overall, you only have 4 passages for the pre-ACT, and you have a little bit more time per passage. So I would recommend on the real ACT, spend 5 or 6 minutes per passage. On the one that you're going to take this year, maybe you can spend 7 or 8 minutes per passage. You will want to keep an eye on the time though. Time can be an issue on the science ACT, especially because it's the 4th test. So after you've taken your other 3 tests, math, English, and reading, you're pretty tired and you're not as quick as you usually are. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about the types of passages you might see. Why am I telling you this? Sometimes when you're familiar with something, you're like, oh, I recognize this. I've heard of this before. You feel a little bit more confident and you do a little bit better. So there are 3 types of passages you might see on your pre-ACT science test, and then we're going to talk about these 3. The first type is the one that's on my screen right now. It's called pure data. Pure data is just what it sounds like. It's just data. So typically you'll see graphs like this graph here. You'll see tables. You might see scatter plots, things like that. Okay. Things that I would say for this type, pay attention to the pictures. I do not read the text unless I cannot find the answer in the pictures. So look at the graphs, look at the tables. Do not read this text. It will just slow you down. Okay. Identify trends. What do you notice about all of these viscosities? They're all increasing. Okay. So pay attention. Is it going up? Is it going down? Sometimes they'll ask you to predict in the next trial or the next year, what might the number be? And if you know it's going up, it has to be higher than all the previous trials. Okay. And then the last thing I would say is make sure you pay attention to titles. Look on the y-axis, look on the x-axis. What are the titles? That will help you figure out what the answers are. Okay. The other titles to pay attention to are things like Table 1, Figure 1. Okay. Usually, if they're being nice, which they're not always that nice, they will tell you in Table 1, in Figure 1. So you know which part of the passage your answer's in, and you can focus on that part. So really pay attention to labels, especially names of things. That will be very helpful to you. Okay. Our second type that you might see are called experiments, okay? It looks a lot like the pure data, but here you have graphs and tables that go with experiments. I know it's this type because usually it'll say, like here you can see experiment 1, experiment 2. Sometimes I've even seen 3 experiments. Sometimes they'll call them trial 1, trial 2, okay? The strategies for this type are pretty much the same as pure data. Skip the text. It's going to confuse you. They try to give you really high level confusing things on purpose. Typically, the text is about something you've never seen before. They do that because not everybody takes the same classes. Like they can't ask you a chemistry question because not every kid in America takes chemistry. So expect whatever these passages are about to be fairly confusing. I would just skip the text and look at the pictures. Okay, make sure you're looking for trends and make sure you're looking at the titles. I see figure 1, I see table 1, I see drops of iodine solution added, I see vitamin C concentration. Look at the titles and circle the titles. And then the last type of passage you'll see on Science ACT is called Dueling Scientists. This one I think is the hardest, but it kind of depends on what you're good at. This one, what do you notice? There are no pictures. It's just text. So this one is pretty much like a reading passage. You read it and you try to figure out the answers. You know you're looking at one of these because there are no pictures, and usually it's labeled like Scientist 1, Scientist 2. They call it dueling scientists because it's different scientists saying what they think about a topic in science. And then you kind of have to figure out, okay, what did scientist one say about the topic? What did scientist two say about the topic? Okay, so you do have to read this one because if you didn't read it, then there would be nothing for you to look at. You do have to read it. Should you read it in great detail to understand it? No, you do not have time. Okay, so I would say skim it, annotate it, underline things. If you notice a topic is in both scientist one and scientist two paragraphs, it's probably important, okay? And then my other strategy is try to find similarities and differences between what the two scientists say. If they both agree about something, that's probably important. If one says something and one says a different explanation, that's probably important too. A lot of the questions for these will ask you to compare the two scientists. Don't freak out about this one. It's gonna be about something you've never heard of. Remember, it's just like a reading passage. All right, so those are the three types: pure data, experiments, and dueling scientists. Okay, what passage type is this? Check it out. What type is this? That should be a pure data because we just see data. That's all we see. And a reminder, strategies for this, don't read that little text, just go straight to the questions looking at these titles. All right, what type is this? You are correct. This is dueling scientists. We see that because we have student one, student two. They must have different opinions about something in science. And strategies for this are skim it, try to figure out what the differences are between the two scientists. Don't spend too much time trying to understand it in detail because it will probably be a very confusing passage. All right. Last thing before you try practice one, these are my top 5 tips, things that I think are a good idea on pre-ACT science. Number 1, I've already told you this, expect things that you've never heard of. They do that on purpose to freak you out. Do not freak out. It's going to be weird words. That's okay. The answers are still there. Just pay attention to titles and find your answers. 2, go straight to the questions. Do not spend time trying to read the passage. It will slow you down. 3, question block to save time. What that means is they're not very nice. They'll usually have like question 1 is about table 1. Question 2 is about table 2. Question 3 is back up to table 1. They go back and forth to slow you down and mix you up. I would say do all the ones about table 1 first. Do all the ones that you can find about table 2 second. And then do all the ones about table 3 third. So you kind of just focus on one part of the passage at a time. That way you don't get mixed up and going back and forth. All right, 4, I've already told you, pay attention to labels and titles. And then 5, the real pre-ACT that you'll take is on paper. Today we're not on paper because we have some limitations with AI. On the real one, write all over it, okay? Labels, circle things. That will help you a lot. All right. We are going to try a pre-ACT science passage. The link is posted there on the Edpuzzle. It's right there on my slide as well. Pause the video, take 5 minutes, try it, try to find the answers, and then we'll check our answers. Pause your video.